Good evening, America, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you, as always, from Washington, D.C. and the WiredToFishCoffee.com studios. Wired to Fish Coffee, you know, this is the official coffee of Just the News. It's my favorite coffee, and you can go right now to Wired2FishCoffee.com and get a fantastic 10% discount just by using the promo code Just News. You can also point your camera at that QR code. All right, tonight, we begin our broadcast with some exclusive reporting from Just the News. It's something we began a few weeks ago when Tulsi Gabbard released some newly declassified documents. We've all been wondering the last few years whether the targeting of school parents or traditional Catholics or gun owners or Trump supporters was random and the result of just a few bad actors within federal law enforcement. Today, we can confirm it was at the direction of the Biden administration and a specific plan written in June 2021. Take a look at this document up here on screen. It shows without a doubt the Biden administration authorized federal law enforcement 4 years ago to target Americans engaged in, quote, concerning non-criminal behavior. They did this in the name of fighting domestic terrorism, but basically they were targeting people who weren't committing crimes. And it had a specific eye on those serving in the military, owning guns, or spreading what officials considered to be disinformation, which in many cases turned out to be true information that the Biden administration just simply disagreed with. We now know this because Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard recently released a fully unredacted version of the prior administration's, quote, strategic implementation plan for countering domestic terrorism. It might otherwise be known as the plan to get conservatives. The memo fully exposes for the first time the law enforcement intelligence framework under President Joe Biden that led the FBI to probe conservative Catholics and parents protesting school board policies, homeland security, to engage in all that censorship we've chronicled on the show, and financial regulators to debank gun owners, lawful gun owners in some cases. We're going to have a full story on this tomorrow morning at justthenews.com, but because you're fans of the show, you got it first here tonight. And in a little bit, we're going to ask Congressman Andy Biggs, a member of the House Judiciary Committee, what he thinks of this document. Amanda, I think we kind of always suspected, but now we got the goods. We've delivered the receipts.
And congratulations to you on that. Big scoop. All right, everybody. The Supreme Court earlier today handed the Trump administration a significant procedural win by allowing its transgender military service ban to take effect while ongoing legal challenges continue. Now, this decision lifts a lower court's injunction, enabling the Pentagon to move forward with implementing President Trump's executive order back from January 27th, which restricts military service based on gender identity under specific conditions. And while the High Court did not rule on the constitutional merits of the policy itself, the move marks a victory for the administration's stance on military readiness and unit cohesion. Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented, indicating a sharp ideological divide. We also should note that Ketanji Brown Jackson spoke 11,003 words when the next closest justice was Amy Coney Barrett at 4,475 words. The men, who were all clustered at the bottom as the least verbose, spoke a collective 9,490 words. All right, everybody. On to trade news and negotiations. President Trump met with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in a fiery but mostly peaceful talk with press. Things heated up when Mark Carney told reporters that Canada is not for sale, and then President Trump retorted by saying, and warning, well, never say never. And Kamala Harris's surprise appearance at the 2025 Met Gala was the latest reminder of just how out of touch the Democrat elite have become. While working Americans are dealing with the consequences, of course, of her party's failed policies, soaring inflation, a broken border, rising crime, well, she chose to reemerge not to help, but to walk the red carpet with celebrities and fashion influencers. The former vice president, who has been largely absent from public life since losing to President Trump in 2024, she showed up at the event, known more for excess than substance. Her attendance at a gala theme around Black dandyism may have played well with coastal elites, but I think it reinforced a growing perception the Democrats are more focused on symbolism and social status than on solving real problems for real people. And finally, the White House is advancing a bold reform that would eliminate the broken Section 8 housing voucher system and impose a 2-year cap on rental aid for able-bodied adults. The goal? Well, to restore accountability, independency, and return housing programs to their original purpose. Temporarily help, not a permanent lifestyle. John, just seems like more common sense fixes to, frankly, long persisting problems, especially in big cities.
Long overdue solution. I think America's decision. He said it's common sense.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're really learning about this presidency. That's what it seems to be focused on. Speaking of common sense, our first guest has a healthy dose of it. He has been one of the most cogent voices in Congress seeking accountability for that wayward and weaponized federal bureaucracy. He joins us from the great state of Arizona, Congressman Andy Biggs. He's also the host of one of my favorite podcasts, The Biggs Idea. I want that name. It's such a good name. I know,
it's so good.
Congressman, good to have you back on the show.
Thanks. Thank you, John. Good to be with you.
Great to see you, sir. All right, I want to start off with the story at the top of the show here. There is this memo. You've had a chance to read it. I'd like to see what your reaction is, what you think, as it looks like this was a go and license to weaponize federal law enforcement against people who weren't committing crimes.
Right. I mean, when you look at it, you see things like we're going to investigate xenophobia. I mean, there's nothing criminal about somebody having a xenophobic idea. I mean, that's kind of bizarre. Ghost guns. They start talking about expanding the use of Executive Order 12333, which is what basically the intelligence community has used to spy on Americans since Ronald Reagan signed it in the early 80s. I mean, they start talking about reporting on this to multilateral institutions. John and Amanda, what you have here is this SIP is basically saying we're going to go after something called domestic terrorism, which may be nothing more than, quote, disinformation related to domestic terrorism, and they're going to go after it, and it has nothing as you pointed out, has nothing necessarily to do with actual criminal conduct. This is just merely a broad brush to start spying on Americans, and we saw that happen. Oddly enough, about the same time that you saw all the FISA abuse and you saw the going after parents or Catholics or whatever else. I mean, this because it was unconstrained weaponization that was mentioned in the SIP. They're going to ostensibly call it domestic terrorism. If you have anything, it didn't even have to be heterodox. It doesn't have to be criminal for sure, but it doesn't have to be heterodox. It just has to be something that some agent or some local agent says, oh, we got a beef about this, we're going to check it out. Spying on Americans, violating the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah. Well, and it just has to be something that was repugnant to that administration, it sounds like. And John hit on this at the top. I think that for a lot of people who still had faith in the FBI under Joe Biden, they thought, well, maybe these are a few bad apples. Maybe this is, certainly the exception and not the rule. But it certainly seems that according to this memo that they were trying to at least make it the rule. So now with Kash Patel as the director of the FBI, is that going to make it even harder for him to reform that agency?
Well, I mean, it is kind of hard. He's having to go deep and remove agents. He believes there's a lot of really good agents left, and I don't doubt that. But you have to discern who are the bad actors, and they need to be removed, and who has a clear understanding of their duty to adhere to the Constitution. And by the way, if this were the only time we've seen our federal government violate our civil rights and the Bill of Rights, I think we would say, well, that's rough, but we're going to fix it. But there seems to be a pattern, and it goes back quite a ways, and you can really see it pick up steam post 9/11 of 2001. So that's the problem here, and ostensibly they're saying this is domestic terrorism, but what's Kash Patel going to do? He's going to have to try to find out people who simply were not willing to stand up and say, no, this is improper, this is not good. And there were people who did stand up, and some of them got fired for doing that.
Yeah, stripped of the security clearances, humiliated just for telling us the truth. Sir, for the longest time, the FBI's had a standard. It's called the predicate. You have to have a reasonable suspicion that a crime occurred to even open an investigation. But this memo eviscerated that. It basically says if you see concerning behavior that's non-criminal, go ahead and start investigating. How do we get back and restore the standards that used to protect us, because you had to have a reasonable suspicion of crime?
Well, I mean, that's what Kash is going to have to do. Director Patel is going to have to do. He and his leadership team, they're going to have to enforce that. And if there's no predicate, but you're investigating, then people need to be let go and fired. This is, man, I mean, we could talk about this, but I'm glad we're bringing this up, because we're getting ready to get back into the FISA reformation.
Right.
But all of this goes hand in glove with that as well, because there are members of the intelligence community, NSA, CIA, FBI, and they think that they are given authority to do whatever they want to, regardless of the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment, to go after you. And so again, we get to my point where it doesn't matter, and you're making the same point. They were taking this to the extreme. They were saying, we don't really care whether there's criminal conduct or suspicious conduct or conduct which may be criminal. They're going to go to, and we get back to my favorite one, is xenophobia. I mean, xenophobia, good grief. They say everybody's xenophobic. If you were for a secure border, the Biden administration labeled you xenophobic. And when you have a SIP that says you can start looking for people who might be xenophobic, what you're saying is, we don't care if they're exercising a First Amendment right, if they're peacefully protesting anywhere, or even if they're writing a letter to the editor that sounds like they want a secure border. That would be xenophobic to the Biden administration. And so it's going to be up to Kash to really do a good job to clean this out.
Yeah, and I think it's very serendipitous timing for this to come out when reforming FISA is a part of the conversation, or as it will be. Sir, you represent a border state, and you are also running to be the head of a border state, running for governor in Arizona. I want to ask you about this idea that President Trump kind of casually floated a few weeks ago about a $1,000 stipend and paying for flights home for people who choose to self-deport. And now DHS has confirmed that that is in the works. As you talk to your constituents and you hear their opinions on these types of programs, does it sound like many will take advantage of this so that maybe someday they can return lawfully?
Well, I hope some will. The reality is a lot of them are going to say, because they're hiding right now. I mean, it's real hard to find them. But if they're going to get $1,000 to get to go back, and the real question will be, are you going to hold that on their record? Because here's the deal: if you've entered the country illegally once, and you come back and you try to get in through the legal process, get in line, you're not going to make it because you entered illegally. So that's going to be a question that some of them are going to ask. But the bottom line is, as they see more and more deportations, and at the current rate, you're probably somewhere north of 600,000 for this calendar year by the time we get there. I think a lot of people will self-deport. We have seen that during the Eisenhower era, for instance. We also saw it when various states were trying to implement in the early 2000s. You saw people self-deport. Yeah,
so important. Sir, one last question I want to ask you today. The House Intelligence Committee put out a very important report. It confirms what you've always been saying. In 2017, when the congressional baseball shooting occurred, the FBI covered up the fact that this man was driven by liberal ideology and domestic terrorism, instead tried to portray him as a guy mentally disturbed trying to commit suicide by cop. They said that conclusion wasn't warranted. What was warranted was telling the American people that he was driven by liberal hatred. Your thoughts on it taking us 8 years to get to the truth about that?
Well, I think every American should be upset by that. I mean, I know I am. But look, this is an agency where the head of the agency was spying on Donald Trump and trying to entrap him and his campaign. So why would we be surprised that they would cover up that a radical leftist who hated Donald Trump, hated everybody who supported Donald Trump, hated members of the House who were Republicans? We should not be surprised that that agency and the leaders of that agency would then cover up that that this guy was a radical like that. I mean, I'm not surprised by it, and you and I have, all three of us have long thought that was the case.
Yep.
But I'm not surprised. I'm just upset and angry about it.
Well, sir, you've done so much over the last few years to get truth out in the face of a very stubborn bureaucracy that didn't want it out. We're starting to get it in droves a little bit more, and you deserve a lot of credit for that. Thanks for joining us today. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you guys, as always.
Great conversation. All right, folks, as we talked earlier in the show, Amanda mentioned as fireworks erupted at the White House as President Trump clashed with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney during a high-stakes meeting. We're going to talk to one of my favorite journalists in Canada, Ezra Levant, right after these messages. Hey folks, if you're a homeowner, you need to listen to this. When's the last time you checked on your home title? I know the answer. That's the legal proof, of course, that you own your house. If you're like me, the answer is never. The problem is, in today's AI and cyber world, scammers are stealing home titles and your equity is the target. Here's how it works. Criminals forge your signature on one document, use a fake notary stamp, pay a small fee with your county, and boom, your home title has been transferred out of your name. That's not a good situation. Then they take out loans using your equity or even sell your property, and you're not even going to know about it until you get a collection or foreclosure notice. That's why you need to stop what you're doing and find out today if you're already a victim. Use the promo code JTN at HometitleLock.com to make sure your title is still in your name. You also get a free title history report plus a free 14-day trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud should happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to fix it. Go to HometitleLock.com right now and use the promo code JTN. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code JTN.
Welcome back to Just the News, No Noise. As we mentioned earlier today, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was in the White House today. He was in the House, and there were some fireworks between President Trump and the Prime Minister, with Carney saying that Canada is not for sale. Joining me now to break it all down is the host of the Ezra Levant Show and founder of Rebel News, one of the largest online independent news organizations in Canada and by far the most trusted. Ezra Levant, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for the warm introduction. You know, I was a little bit curious about how things would go because, for example, when Vladimir Zelensky went into the White House, holy moly, did that explode. Whereas, for example, when the Irish prime minister went there, it went smooth. It was a love-in. I think today's meeting between Donald Trump and Mark Carney was closer to the love-in than the Zelensky argy-bargy. And even on the contentious question of the 51st state, I think both sides sort of calmed it down. They agreed to disagree. But look, I'm a huge skeptic and critic of Mark Carney. He's a globalist. He's got 3 passports. He was the former director of the World Economic Forum. He's an environmental extremist. He's for net zero. But I got to say, I think he got out unscathed today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because did he have something to prove to the Canadian people, especially his voters? Because I have a feeling that his voters, if you got a Venn diagram of Trump haters in Canada and people who voted for Carney, it might just end up being a circle. How do you think they felt about it?
Oh, yeah, and the chief anti-Trump advocate in Canada was Mark Carney himself.
Right.
It was his central campaign issue. You know, only 6 months ago, the Conservative candidate was ahead by 20 points in the polls. It was going to be a huge landslide. But then, I hate to say it, Trump's jokes about the 51st state, you know, some people took it as banter, but there are some Canadians who have an anti-American streak. There's a lot of Trump derangement syndrome up here. And I think about 1 million Canadians sort of moved their vote towards Mark Carney. And he was banging the anti-Trump drum everywhere he went. So it's sort of weird to see the guy who had the anti-Trump campaign now praising Trump. I don't know if you saw that part.
Yeah.
The first words out of the Mark Carney's mouth were, "I praise your leadership. You're a transformative leader. I respect you." That was the guy who 8 days ago was bashing Trump.
Right.
Even on Friday, he was still sounding the war drums, and then he comes here. Yeah, it was. And you're right. It was a really remarkable performance. He toned everything down. Didn't want to be Zelensky, I guess, as maybe if we turn it into a verb. But there's another element here, which is he wasn't able to form a majority government. He's got a minority government. He's got an entire province where the people are legitimately talking about succession, even though I know the premier isn't in Alberta yet. And an energy industry that on last night's show made clear they'll go around Carney to get deals in the United States if Carney gets in the way. How much does his domestic weakness, even though he won the election by a good margin, play into this? He really doesn't have a lot of room to maneuver, does he?
Well, Alberta is the province that both has all the oil and has the most, angst about being in Canada, because Mark Carney is anti-oil. Like I said, he's a net zero radical. Now, right now, the USMCA trade deal gives the United States free, in fact, preferable access to buy Canadian oil. And we are the #1 source of U.S. imports, which I think is preferable to the United States buying oil from OPEC conflict oil countries. Absolutely. In fact, the Premier of Alberta has said she would like to double oil production to get the U.S. off of foreign conflict oil. Imagine if the U.S. didn't have to import any more oil from regimes in the Middle East. So that can happen right now under the USMCA. Donald Trump's talked about turning on the Keystone XL pipeline. I think it's revivable, but again, would Mark Carney stop that? He's an anti-oil extremist. At the same time, Albertans, that's that oil province again, they're feeling like the rest of the country wants to undo them. I don't think there's an American equivalent to that. What happens if there's one part of the country that's always abused and picked on and insulted and disrespected? In Canada, secession is not against the law. In fact, both the Parliament and the Supreme Court have approved it as long as you have a referendum with a clear question and a clear result. So the Premier of Alberta, who loves pumping oil, loves selling oil to America, has said she would be open to a secession referendum next year. So it's interesting she's doing that. On the one hand, she wants to get a better deal within Canada from Mark Carney, but it's almost like this second track of the referendum could be an or else. And if I was an American, I would be paying very close attention to that. Maybe Donald Trump's 51st state might not happen, but if Alberta sort of became independent in some way from Canada, like imagine if Saudi Arabia or Venezuela, that much oil we're talking about, suddenly was on, up for grabs. So I don't know, it's very interesting. And I think that Mark Carney, like you say, John, he's got a wobbly minority. We might be in another election within the next year.
Wow, that would be huge.
Yeah. Ezra, President Trump is bullish on the tariff. So I don't know. I mean, I think a win-win situation in this situation is typically both sides being equally unhappy. President Trump even indicated that there was nothing that Carney could say to him that would change his mind regarding the tariffs. So what ultimately is the win-win, or I guess more accurately, lose-lose situation for the United States and Canada regarding trade?
We really are like Batman and Robin. You guys are the senior partner, but we're the junior partner. We're a great team. I think it's a wonderful partnership. And it was clear in today's meeting that Trump didn't get along with the previous prime minister, Justin Trudeau, or his deputy, Chrystia Freeland. Trump made that point crystal clear. So I'm hoping now that that irritant is out of the way, we can be friendlier. And like I say, that oil, I actually wrote a book a few months ago called Deal of the Century, the America First Plan for Canada's Oil Sands. Because if I'm thinking America First, what do I want? I want to get that Canadian oil. I don't want it to go to China. And really, I think of it like a huge real estate deal. It's a $13 trillion deal to buy all the oil from the oil sands for 50 years. Get America off the conflict crude. So I think maybe if you pitch Donald Trump almost like a Greenland deal or a Panama deal and say, look, you don't actually have to annex Canada. And you don't want to anyways. You don't want another California-style left-wing vote in the Electoral College. And by the way, Quebec, which is the French quarter of Canada, they speak French. They're bilingual. You don't want that. What you want is access to the good stuff. You already have that through the USMCA. So let's be friends. Let's knock down these tariffs. I admit, Canada has some nasty tariffs on dairy, on poultry. We keep out American banks and cell phones. Speaking as a Canadian consumer, I want to get rid of all those trade barriers because I would like lower prices and I would like access to American cell phone companies, American mortgages, American cheese and butter, et cetera. So I think Trump has some legit grievances. I think there's a way out of this. And by the way, I think President Trump showed today that he's willing to be positive and go forward. I'm hoping, because I think the two countries, we're best buddies, and it hasn't felt that way over the last few months. I hope we get back to that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ezra. I think that will be the ultimate outcome. One last question for you, because we've had this parade of liberal foreigners who've come through the United States, and a lot of them, like you mentioned, Ireland, Great Britain, now Canada, got along great, and they seem, rather moderate when they're here. They seem, nice guys. But when it comes to Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney's about as left as you can get. We had a story this morning. This man wrote an op-ed suggesting that Americans be prosecuted for putting money into GoFundMe accounts to help those truckers who were honking their horns for a better COVID-19 policy. because they might have committed, I'm not making this up, sedition. You've probably known this. Americans here didn't know it. No matter what Mark Carney brings to America, he's pretty far to the left, right?
Oh, absolutely. And remember, that's when Trudeau put the country under martial law.
That's right.
Seizing bank accounts, riot horses. Mark Carney wrote that op-ed in our version of the New York Times called the Globe and Mail, saying that we had to go harder. So he is not a civil libertarian. He doesn't believe in the freedom of speech. He would never support a First Amendment in our country. He is a bit of a conspiracy theorist. He was blaming America. He was trying to make it seem like that was our January 6th moment in Canada. In fact, it was peaceful truckers who were just protesting for civil liberties. So I think Mark Carney is dangerous. Today, he managed to have a smile on his face and get out of the White House without too much damage. But we'll see. Like I say, most Canadians don't know anything about this guy. He really only returned to Canada in the last few weeks after being overseas for a decade. All of us need to know, who is Mark Carney?
Yeah, great point.
Absolutely. Everybody, rebelnews.com. That is the only
Good way to
place
get to
you
know
can
Mark
go
Carney.
for
Just read Ezra
That's
Levant. He's got great work.
I was
Yeah.
about to say, thanks to the man on the screen, you guys do have a real and true news source in Canada. Go to rebelnews.com. Ezra, always a joy to have you here. Thanks so much for being here. All right, everybody, we're going to take a very quick break, and we will be back on the other side.
Welcome back, America. A little news to top off this next segment. Bernie Kerik, the former NYPD commissioner who gained so much fame for his handling of the 9/11 crisis in New York, and before that, cleaning up New York streets alongside of Mayor Rudy Giuliani. He is in the hospital with a cardiac event. We hear that he is recuperating, that the prognosis is good. We want to send our thoughts to him. He's been a great friend of this show and of the Just the News podcast and family. So, Bernie, we're thinking of you. All right, time to turn to a topic that affects all of us. We're all digitally connected. We're like connected all day long. It isn't just Nigerian scam artists anymore that can steal your money, your privacy, your home, everything. We're connected in so many ways. There are all sorts of sophisticated threats to you and I every single day. And we thought we'd bring in a really great subject expert. She's a best-selling author and a technical ethics expert, Dr. Catherine Albrecht. Dr. Albrecht, good to have you on the show.
Hey, it's good to be here.
All right. I think a lot of people look at this and they say, it's so easy to have the Google suite or the Microsoft suite, and I like convenience, but sometimes that convenience, those suites, create unique vulnerabilities for us. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned about Google's business model and its relationship to vulnerability.
Yeah, so I've actually been concerned about Google for about 15, 20 years now. Back in 2010-ish, they created something called the oneness. And this was an idea that all of their services, which up until that point had been separate, would all be combined. So your email would know what you were doing in your calendar. Your Google Docs would be linked up with, all of your Google services, your messaging, whatever it is, everything would be combined into one service. Even your Google Maps would be linked up with your email, for example. And while that seems convenient on the one hand, now that we have moved into the artificial intelligence era, it's becoming actually quite dangerous. And in fact, I was very disturbed to discover in Google's terms of service, and you have to have a magnifying glass and a lot of time on your hands to read it all, but in their terms of service, they have very disturbingly given artificial intelligence, their own DeepMind artificial intelligence, they've reserved the right to have artificial intelligence read your email and train on it. Now, the concern here, we know artificial intelligence can write better emails than all of us. It can write a novel probably better than any of us. Artificial intelligence does not need to train on how to write in the English language. It's very good at that. What concerns me is that by giving themselves that right, what Google essentially is reserving is the ability to create dossiers of information on each individual, all of the 1.8 million Gmail accounts, and to store and record all of that information. And in the past, so I've been a privacy advocate for many years, but in the past, people would say, well, I'm not a CEO, I'm not a senator, I am, I'm just a dentist or an accountant or a housewife. I'm not concerned that they're actually going to be reading my email. So who cares if they're able to access this information? Well, AI is the game changer here, because where it's true that the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, no one single agency or individual or even group of individuals individuals would be able to keep track of all of us all the time. It's just impossible. But artificial intelligence has endless amounts of attention, endless amounts of storage, endless amounts of capability to watch all of us. And I think with some of the things happening recently with Google, particularly their refusal to address a recent phishing scam that happened that could affect 1.8 billion Google users or Gmail users, has me very concerned that we don't want to unleash artificial intelligence on our emails. So I think it's time we rethink what we've been doing for, I don't know, 20 years now. All of us is getting these free email accounts. At my church, they had a sign up board, and I looked at all the email addresses, and I would say 2/3 of them were gmail.com. And it makes sense. It stands to reason it's free. Why not do it? Well, there are reasons that we shouldn't do it. And I think Google is beginning to reveal those, and the cracks are starting to show.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, the term "the oneness" sounds so unbelievably dystopian. But
Isn't it?
yeah, Apple kind of has the same type thing as far as connectability with their not only their devices but all of the software and apps that you can use. I assume that on the creative side, Adobe probably has something similar, and Microsoft. But is Google unique in that it does allow the AI access to this? Is Google the worst, or do they all do it?
Well, I haven't seen that exact language in anyone else's terms of service. So Google, we have to bear in mind that Google was really the originator of artificial intelligence. In fact, the reason that ChatGPT exists through something called OpenAI is because Elon Musk wanted to create an open source version of what he saw as a dangerous development going on with DeepMind at Google. And so OpenAI was supposed to be open source so people could access it, so they could see what was happening inside of it. And of course, that model has changed dramatically under Sam Altman. But the original idea really was to protect the world from Google's AI. Elon Musk actually recounts a conversation he had with Larry Page, in which Larry Page was saying, this thing we're building, this was years ago, this thing we're building is incredible. It's amazing. It's going to take over. It's going to be a new species. And Elon Musk, as he tells the story, he said, I don't want another species taking over. I think human beings need to be in charge. And Larry Page apparently told him he was being speciesist or speciest, like racist, for supporting the human race over other races. So I think we have to also look at who is in the leadership at Google, who is determining the direction of the company. And most disturbingly, about 2 weeks ago, a story came out that there was a phishing exploit against Google that was very convincing even to security experts. It was, how normally you get a phishing exploit and it says it's from, hackersrus.ru. And it says, click here for your Bank of America account, and you click it, or you don't click it because you look to see where it goes. Well, in this particular phishing exploit, the address that you would click to was sites, sites.google.com. So if you ever get a phishing email or something that says, in this case, it said your email contents are being subpoenaed by law enforcement and your case number is, and then it had like a 16-digit long official looking case number, and it said, click here for information. And it was sites.google.com. So you would think that's legitimate. It's google.com, not scammers.ru. And when you went to that website, there was a very legitimate looking page that said, enter your username and password to find out the details of the case against you. And the minute you do that, then those scammers, whoever they are, those hackers, have access to your account. In the past, if they got access to your email account, the big concern might be that they would find a bank account number or some personal information in there. The problem now is that artificial intelligence can go through each individual bank account in detail, figure out that, 3 years ago, you went through a toll booth in Pennsylvania and didn't pay the toll, and you got a bill by mail for this date and this particular infraction number, and that you paid $18.90 for it. And it could actually personalize on the fly a scam email to you saying that 1870 bounced and you now owe $1,800, or we're going to impound your car and issue a warrant for your arrest. You better pay within the next 24 hours. And boom, they're right there. They've got you. So AI changes the game. It means that we have to be extremely careful with who gets access to our email, because having access to it now could be personalized scams that anyone would fall for.
I'm ready to use the Moses solution for this. Let's just go back to stone tablets.
Yes,
I'm good with it.
yes.
It's too scary
Well,
now.
talking about solutions, so back in 2013,
Yep.
I had been working on this issue for about 10 years at that point, and I helped to create a private encrypted email service for regular people called Start Mail. We were
Wow.
actually running a search engine alternative to Google called Start Page, where you could start your search on the internet, and from that we created Start Mail. And I will never forget the meeting where we were all sitting, the executive team together, saying, you know what we really need now that we're protecting people from Google searches, which are being used for advertising purposes, we need private email. So we created startmail.com, which is, it makes encryption, which is the NSA's best way of protecting data. It makes it available to regular people. You just move a toggle switch and your email is encrypted.
Wow.
So email encryption has always been difficult, but we've made it easy. And that protects people. So I'm encouraging people to make the switch, leave the Yahoos, leave the Gmails, leave all the free services. And I'd love it if people would switch to StartMail.
That's a very good idea. Go check it out, folks. Dr. Catherine Alberg, what a great conversation. Thanks for helping us so much, and thanks for joining us tonight. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. But before we do, I know you're wondering, when's the right time to start adding collagen to your diet, right? How about today? Collagen production starts to dwindle in your 20s. And by the time you hit my age in the 50s, decreased collagen contributes to wrinkles, sagging skin, joint discomfort, all the things you know about. Native Path Collagen can help. It's packed with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers, and the ones your body needs for healthy joints, skin, bones, hair, nails, and your gut. Plus, it's third-party tested for purity with no fillers, no additives, and most importantly, no artificial junk. 2 scoops a day of Native Path delivers 18 grams of protein. I put it in my coffee. You can put it in your tea, you drink anything, soup. It's completely flavorless and easy to use. Now, right now, get a special bundle deal at a fraction of the retail price. Plus, you're going to get free shipping available at getnativepath.com/justnews. With over 4 million jars sold, thousands of 5-star reviews, and a 365-day money-back guarantee, this is your moment to take control of your aging before your symptoms get worse. So go to nativepath.com/justnews right now. Supplies are limited and demand is surging. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Just the News, No Noise. I think a lot of Americans think that it is completely out of touch for Democrats to prioritize protecting illegal aliens from deportation while Americans are struggling with rising crime and a broken immigration system. Democrats are pushing for policies that reward lawbreakers and make it harder to keep our community safe. Instead of focusing on securing the border and deporting those with criminal records, they're more concerned with protecting people who have disregarded our laws. Joining us now to discuss this is the editor-in-chief for AMAC Newsline, Shane Harris. Good evening. Thanks so much for being with us, Shane.
Thanks for having me.
On the border, I have seen a number of Democrats lately who have expressed what seems to be incredulity over the fact that their message is not resonating with the American people. But their message certainly seems to be protect people like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and for the rest of the Americans who are dealing with the fallout from the Biden border crisis, forget them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredibly out of touch. And for Democrats wondering why they're struggling so much, why their party has a 29% approval rating, they need to look no further than their stance on illegal immigration, than their stance on President Trump's mission to protect the border. They're going down there, they're having margaritas with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who is a suspected MS-13 gang member, and then they come back home and they wonder why their own voters can't stand them. And, you know, nothing quite encapsulates Democrats' struggles with voters, like their stance on illegal immigration, like how they're pulling out all the stops to protect people who aren't even American citizens, who aren't their constituents. And it's from an American citizen's perspective, it's frankly disgusting to see.
Yeah. I had one of those moments this morning where that song from the 70s came back, Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, because I saw President Trump, announce his policy yesterday. All right, $1,000, get out of the country, self-deport. You won't be penalized if you come in legally next time. And the Democrats came out and said, we got a better idea. And I thought, oh, well, maybe they learned their lesson. And instead they're like, no, instead of giving them $1,000 and deporting them, let's give them a work permit and keep them here. And I'm like, they simply don't understand the resentment that Americans have for people who illegally entered this country and ruined this country. Why the disconnect? Is it because they're just so beholden to money, or are they tone deaf? They're not reading the polls?
Well, they're not reading the polls, and part of it, I think, is Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
So we're seeing this all-out warfare from the left to stop the deportation of illegal aliens. Well, maybe somebody ought to inform the Democrats who are so upset about this that Bill Clinton deported 12 million illegal aliens. You know how many of them did not have trials? The left's demanding due process for every illegal alien. 12 million illegal aliens deported under the Clinton administration, more than 90%, no trial. Under President Obama, or remember, the left nicknamed President Obama the deporter in chief. They were very upset with him for deporting what were ultimately modest numbers of illegal aliens. But during the Obama administration, 83% a judge was not involved in their deportation. And so what we're seeing now, really, this is the culmination of the left's long-term plan, right? They brought in 10 million illegal aliens under Joe Biden. And now they're saying, oh, well, we have to give a court trial to all of them, to deport any of them. This was their plan all along. They know that it's completely unrealistic to do a trial for every illegal alien in this country. And so they're hoping to just ride out the Trump administration, get a Democrat back in office, and they'll basically just hold the line from Biden to whoever they hope the next Democrat is. And really, it's undermining the mandate that the American people delivered to President Trump last November. And that's why it's so dangerous.
Yeah. I saw a headline yesterday regarding Cinco de Mayo, a legacy news organization, fear-mongering about how a lot of Cinco de Mayo celebrations were canceled because people were concerned about ICE raids and deportations and such. And it does seem like the media is really trying to push this narrative that what President Trump and Tom Homan are doing is unpopular. However, you look at the raw numbers as far as especially Hispanic men and black men, and his support with them has not waned. How do you explain it?
Yeah, so, minorities, Hispanics who came here legally, Black Americans, Asian Americans, really all Americans. But those groups, they want to see the law enforced. They understand how mass unchecked illegal immigration hurts our economy, hurts our housing market. And so, they're very supportive of what President Trump is doing. It's funny you mentioned the media freaking out about deportations and all this talk about due process. Well, where was due process for people like January 6th defendants who were American citizens, were left in prison to rot, were denied bail for nonviolent crimes? Where was due process for people like Mark Hawk, who Joe Biden's FBI conducted a dawn raid on his home, terrified his wife and children? Where was due process for President Trump when Biden's FBI raided Mar-a-Lago? What we're really seeing, it's almost not even a double standard. It's just one standard of justice. And that standard is, if you're an illegal alien, we're going to allow you to abuse the legal system to stay here as long as possible. But if you're somebody who we disagree with politically and you're an American citizen, you don't get due process. You just get the full brunt of the left-wing lawfare machine.
Yeah, really important. Real quickly, this just happened a few seconds ago. China and the U.S. will meet for trade talks. Markets are going to go wild tomorrow. All the naysayers and gloom doomers in the media have gotten this wrong again. These tariffs keep returning good things for American public. Do you think the media is getting tired of getting shown up?
Well, if the last 10 years have showed us anything, it's that the media is never tired of being shown up by President Trump. And really, the sad thing for the corporate media is that this whole thing was entirely predictable. This is what President Trump has done his entire career, whether it's in business or politics. He makes big promises, he comes out hard, and then he comes to the negotiating table and forges a better deal for the American people.
Yeah. It's almost like he wrote a book on deal making or something.
That's right.
Oh, hey, yes, he did.
Shane Harris, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And everybody remember that for just $16 a year, you will receive the AMAC magazine, access to exclusive money-saving discounts, and become part of a community that is holding government accountable. So join today at amac.us/justnews. Again, that's amac.us/justnews. Facts matter. Your voice matters. So go check it out. Welcome back, everybody. A few final thoughts and stories before we head out for the weekend. I think John and I were of the same mind that we needed to hit the SCOTUS story at the top of the show, and then you had that major scoop with the FBI, so we went with that, thankfully. But SCOTUS still very important, that ruling today that at least for now, President Trump's executive order banning transgenders from the military can proceed, and the left is all up in arms over it.
No doubt. This is their religion of politics. Listen, why is this important? Because normally a preliminary injunction has to meet the threshold of likely chance of succeeding on the merits later. So the court is already signaling that maybe the commander-in-chief has a better chance of winning on this. This is a major setback for that sort of appeal, far left appeal that the Democrats have built their entire political mountain on. And I think it's really interesting because there's nobody that I saw today that was worried about the Supreme Court ruling except the 20% that watch, or 10% or 2% that watch MSNBC. So that disconnect we've been talking about all throughout the show, including with Shane, exacerbated again.
Well, and we hear from a lot of service members at this network and on this show about how they feel about what is happening with the military and, you know, with Pete Hegseth as secretary, military readiness, evening the standards between men and women, which I think is, as a woman, I think that the standards should be the same across the board.
Right.
But John, you even look medically and psychologically at the issues and the statistics pertaining transgender people, that threshold for military readiness and soundness of mind, and you consider all of the issues that they can deal with, from anxiety to depression and bipolarism, and it doesn't fit into an environment in combat where you have to protect your country and other men and women.
That's certainly the argument the Trump administration made. Also, combat unit cohesion, important.
Yeah.
People feeling comfortable. They're not going to be fighting at full capacity. Listen, at the end of the day, people are going to make whatever choice they have. We're a free country. We can do what they want, but you can't bring it into places where it affects the performance of the military. And I think most Americans are comfortable with that. We don't want to discriminate, but we don't have to make special accommodations. And I think that that's the place that this new civil rights era, and I put that in quotes, that Barack Obama brought in, where we're settling, which is, hey, I'm more concerned about losing my free speech rights for everybody than I am if a transgender person can't force their way into the military. And so I think Americans have left this behind. They're much more worried about what's happening at the dinner table, in the workplace, and I think that that's going to be the key thing. And on that note, the China announcement just a few minutes ago, the China and U.S. kind of trade talks, that's a big honking deal.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, it fits into what we were just talking about with Shane, the fact that President Trump, he starts off on this foot where it's, you know, it's a little bit bellicose to begin with. President Trump stands firm, and he has been standing firm, but then you come to a point where there's a little bit of wiggle room, and then that's when, I mean, I think this is the beginning of, I don't want to say the beginning of the end because that sounds doomer. It's the beginning of the doomer mentality for liberals, and then being able to make excuses for what President Trump is or isn't doing on
Well, they can't distract us much longer. They're going to have to start to address the issues that they don't address: the economy, the security, the insecurity that they created. And I think President Trump is closing down these issues, and they're off the table now. It's going to be really important to find out what the Democratic Party does to start addressing them, or are they going to go extinct failing to address them? Very interesting.
Hey, do you plan on flying into the New York area
You're reading
anytime
my
soon? If so,
mind.
can I recommend LaGuardia or JFK?
Yeah, let's not do Newark. I'll tell you what, I'm a little worried about Reagan, although I'm glad that there's been major changes here. But what's shocking in both of these places, when you see what's happened now, right, the control tower lost contact with all planes in the sector for 90 seconds.
That is a
90 seconds. It was
long
so stressful
time.
to the air traffic controllers, because they thought the disaster was about to happen, that they've taken some psychological time off. They were traumatized by it. But it's happened 3 times, according to my sources, this time and 2 prior times. And here's a second thing. It's just like what happened at the DC. Right, we had several near misses before the plane and helicopter collided, and then we had several near misses after. How do we not, how many warning signs does the agency need to do before they take action? Why wait for the tragedy to happen before that? This is classic bureaucracy. We got to get on top of that. I'll tell you what, this is a great threat to air traffic.
My fear is, I spoke to a pilot friend about this after the Reagan crash, and he said that there are just far too many people, both air traffic controllers, pilots, who observe the big sky theory, which is that the sky is just too big for catastrophe to happen that often. But it has happened that often. We have seen it so much.
It's more crowded than ever before, too. We put more planes up, and they're more synchronized, and there's much more forgiveness time between them. I'm starting to like the John Madden bus travel idea. I mean, just jump on John Madden's old football bus, and he would never go on an airplane. He's afraid of flying. I love to fly, and I do it all the time. But someone has to wake up. And listen, I think it's on Sean Duffy. It's not one thing to address it after the fact. Stop letting these things happen. Prevent them. Stop telling us you're going to address it after the fact. That's what the last Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg done. Sean Duffy, jump in and fix this, because We don't need any more crises in the air right now. We really don't.
Yeah, well, that's what the last transportation secretary
Yeah.
did when he wasn't on paternity leave.
He was excuse making.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that President Trump has expressed numerous times his confidence in Secretary Duffy. So I think that we are going to get
Yeah.
some answers and hopefully some action soon. And, you know, the merit-based hiring has got to be re-employed back into something
Yeah.
that is
And
literally a
resources.
life or death situation.
We're short air traffic controllers.
Yeah.
We really are.
Yep. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you being here. And we're going to be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern. Have a wonderful evening. Everybody head over to justthenews.com for the latest headlines all throughout the night and the rest of the week. And we'll be back